the price is way up, but like that's way up too. And they go, oh, it's a cash buyer's market. Okay, well, who are those people? Maybe the Bitcoin millionaires. Most of us don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to just outlay on these houses or anything. It's the opposite. Most people have 1% or 5% to put on a house in this market. It's brutal.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Folks, we're starting a new show today, and it's this is going to be another good one I'm looking forward to. It's we've had some folks, we've kind of swap it around here, being on different people's shows here at times, and so you're going to in for a treat today, I think, as we're looking through our history of different shows and what we're moving forward on. But with that, I will say that I am kind of excited as far as the fall weather. It's nice. It's actually was cool enough. I gave serious consideration, Lalo, to going out in the backyard. I've got a little fire pit out there and lighting that puppy up and smoking a cigar and kicking back and relaxing. And just about the time I thought I was going to do it, it was kind of late in the evening and the moon was shining. It was about a half a moon last night or whatever. And I was like, let me just go in and go to bed before I start staying up way too late. And I'm telling you what, I'm just like, man, I'm invigorated. I wound up sleeping about 6-7 hours or something like that. I don't know what to do with myself this morning or today. Anyway, how you doing?
Really good. I know people are going to give me some trash or something. I don't care, but this is my original team right here.
Yeah, the Rangers.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? They well, they're in the World Series, right? So
right. So I'm just saying that because I'm always pulling for the Yankees.
For the Yankees, yeah, you and me both.
I can prove I'm an actual original Texas fan. I named my son after Nolan Ryan, so.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go. Well, I got to tell you, though, I this may be the year for the Rangers. I got to admit, last night, Philly and
Diamondbacks.
Yeah, Arizona were playing, and I finally did Arizona win it because they were up by 2 runs.
So I didn't know this until I heard. Well, I did know it, but I mean, I had forgotten about that. 2 years removed. Both teams were at 100 losses. So, and now they're both in the World Series. That's cool, though. So anyway, I wanted to also, when we bring in our guest here, and I have to wear these because I'm looping back onto my board, but I wanted to show something here. So this is our original song, right? So that's our original song. But because we have this guest, this is a modification to the song. And then, wait.
Hey, folks, you're in for a treat today. This is good. Bring on our guest, Lalo. You're going to love this. This is good. Yes. I love that.
So we have Timothy Dooner, also known as Dooner or Tim or Timothy, however you want to call him, from What the Truck, and he's from Freight Waves. Really excited. We were on his show a couple of weeks ago trying to talk about the government shutdown, but it never happened. But still, we do have him on, and we're excited.
It's going to be coming around because those 45 days are
20, 30 more days here. So, but anyway, Tim, thank you for joining us. And if some of you don't hear his show, the reason that I did that, and Tim, he'll know exactly what I did there. I just added the gong and the cowbell, and Tim is.
I appreciated them. We try to bring in the culture of freight into the show, and a big theme lately has been the gong. But you guys got me excited. You reminded me of that Nolan Ryan thing, and now I want to put. Who did he have in the headlock? Who was he giving the business to?
Oh my gosh, that was awesome, wasn't it? Let me see. I'll Google it because I can't remember.
that's one of the best things. I know a lot of guys who have that picture on their wall, like the headlock.
Yeah. It's like Nolan Rhinos, man. He's a class act, but it's like you know what? He ain't gonna back down either.
Hey man, he's a big dude on that mound. And he even when he was like 20, he kind of looked like a 42-year-old sort of like grizzled pitcher. He always just had like that dad look.
Yeah. That was so Robin Ventura, it says here.
We got to talk about, we're talking about baseball because our world hurts too much. There's just like business hurts. The stock market is getting its like butt kicked today. Companies going out of business in freight all over the place. Too much capacity out there. Still trying to like unwind ourselves from the trouble we got into in the pandemic. Got wars going on. There's a lot happening. We're dodging a lot of bullets out here.
It's as is painful. Then you're still coming back to the scenario, especially the small guys out there. How am I going to survive? What can I do? Whatever. And some of it, you got to diversify your market. You got to, meaning that, okay, I'm traditionally only hauling short runs, out of distribution centers to this or that or whatever, or only one long run or whatever. It's like, maybe I need to step over into agriculture. Or maybe I need to step into, tankers. Although I got to say, any of the truckers out there that you're driving tankers, good. And I salute you because that is not only a tough job, but there are people, folks, on a side note here on safety, don't sit there in traffic and then just cut in front of a big truck thinking you've got an open space right there because they cannot stop on a dime. And you're thinking they've got space in there, you can cut in there. You're good. If you have to stop real fast, you're going to have a truck up your backside there. So anyway.
I saw a video yesterday. I posted it. It was I posted it on my Twitter. Some guy in Brazil, he's in a white sedan and he pulls his car in front of a semi. He was road rage, and it almost like it's Brazilian. Almost like it's like carjacking. There's no guns or anything, and the semi like drives around it. And he's like, "Fine, what is this guy doing?" The guy comes back and cuts in front of the semi to like brake check him. But he did it right in front of the semi. So the semi just drove like right through him and knocked him off to the side. You're not going to win. That's just like a 20-pound man trying to stop a 350-pound man.
Yeah, it ain't going to work.
It ain't going to be pretty. You're not making it through that one.
Well, the one thing in today's world, there's so many truckers now, it's almost standard equipment is to have the dash cams and you even have to have them on the side so you can catch some of the stuff where these people are doing it. And finally, it looks like the police are really cracking down on some of these people that are trying to brake check folks and whatnot, which is a good thing. But there's still folks that'll get hurt. And a tanker, that liquid in there moving around, they can stop and, you think you've got it under control and that liquid will move back and then come through and slosh again and will just literally flip them or shove them or whatever. So, I always try and give them a lot of respect, but hey, folks, what we've got is, Dooner has it's a live broadcast podcast, I guess, right, isn't it? And you do it 3 days a week, right? And with that, it is focused on the transportation industry predominantly. And there's some really cool things, but I think it's, you're running it, at 12 noon. Is it Nooner with Dooner?
It's noon. Yeah. Nooner with Dooner, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
I love it. Talk about that a little bit. So, some of the things because your show, it's fast paced. I got to tell you, man, I thought that Lalo and I had a pretty good little thing going here, but we're recording and then we edit it and it's kind of a relaxed atmosphere. Man, yours is like, right in there back to back and live and all that. Talk about that a minute. How'd that all come about?
Back in 2016, I was doing sales for a 3PL. I was selling global freight and trucking. So, cans and boxes, containers and 53s. So you had your 40s and those. And it wasn't a great market. And I wasn't doing that well. And I was finding a hard time sort of like, it seems so like just sending out cold emails and cold calling all the time. It's very hard to sort of just develop relationships from that. And I'm like, I listen to so many podcasts. I've been an avid podcast listener since 2006. And I got into them because I would take the subway into work in Boston. I couldn't listen to my radio. I just like talk radio. So my next option was I got into podcasting. Or listening to podcasting. So I listened to podcasts for a long time. And then when I was in this position, I was like, Freight needs a podcast. They need one that's kind of interesting. There was maybe 2 at the time, but they sounded like stripped webinar audio. It sounded like very kind of like Spawn-Conny. Like they would just do it to promote. It was like internal marketing, which seemed fine. Right, I was like, you know what?
Scripted.
I don't think that idea is dead, but I think that they're doing it wrong. And I think that if I do a podcast, it's like what I actually like to listen to, like what more mainstream podcasts sound like your Bill Simmons of the world or Adam Carolla, who were some of the pioneers in this field and who I was listening to at the time. And Bill Burr, I wanted to bring that sort of energy and that sort of atmosphere to a show and apply it to Freight. But initially it was just to so I could have a meeting with you or CEO of whatever company, freight company, and I could just introduce myself because that makes sales so much easier when somebody knows who you are. You have a way in there. The company at the time, I wasn't selling that well. I had my own issues. I drank way too much of the time. So they fired me, and it was the best thing that ever happened because I went into rehab. I took I had 2 weeks of health insurance. So I went into rehab. I took care of that. My wife was just about to have our second baby. And then we have the kid and I have some time to hang out with him. And then it's January of 2017. I'm like, what am I going to do? And then my therapist was like, why don't you just do that? You said you want to start a podcast and these are your issues at the job and all that stuff. And they're like, well, what's stopping you? You have all the free time in the world. And I called up my buddy Ryan, who I talked about it before. And I was like, let's start doing it. And to me at the time, I was like, this would probably get me a job in marketing or could get me at least a job. It could be like a living resume.
Yep. Get you some exposure. Somebody say, hey, we like what this guy's saying or whatever. Let's get him on board. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't dream it would lead to being a professional podcaster or a media company. I just thought that this would give me marketing experience so I could get a marketing job at a 3PL. I had a non-compete. I couldn't go back into sales. Sales hadn't been good for my mental health in a bad market. I didn't want to go back to sales. So I started doing the show and, it got traction really quickly because I think the idea of having more of the conversations you'd have instead of on the conference stage, what you'd have in the hallway at a conference was kind of what people wanted to hear. There's nobody doing it. So I launched the shipping pod and, this guy, Steve Aborn at a company called Freight Plus had heard it. He lived pretty close to me and he was like, I like the traction you're getting. I see the idea behind it. And he initially hired me to be a ghostwriter and that kind of funded, he didn't pay me to podcast or anything. It was just ghostwrite articles for his blog, but that funded my first year of being on my own where I made almost $12,000 and went bankrupt. Thank you, wife, for standing by me. And she also had a job, but we didn't do well. But what happened is I knew that once I got Steve's attention that there's a market for this and I could at least maybe get into Freight Plus. And that's what happened. He offered me a job as their marketing director and I got to take over and do a podcast for them and do their decks and their RFPs and help out there. Because prior to this, before I got into sales, I had all this operational experience from working at FedEx Trade Networks and Global Trade. I was doing imports and exports for Reebok footwear, one of the most annoying things on earth to classify. And then I switched into duty drawback. But sales was it just didn't work out for me. Got into this podcast thing. I saw Craig Fuller from FreightWaves. When I was ghostwriting, I had to Google freight news, supply chain technology. And I kept seeing this company, FreightWaves, showing up near the top for all these newsletters I had to write for Freight Plus. And I'm like, I like the look of it. And then they had this conference, Market Waves. I didn't go to it, but I saw it. And it looked more like the marketing conferences I went to than the freight conferences. When there were people on stage, there weren't bright lights. They would actually turn the lights off and have lighting and it would ambience and it looked cool and it looked way more energetic. So Craig was out promoting these things called freight futures. And I'm like, I bet I can get him as a guest. He wants to bring some exposure on this. I can see him talking all the time. So I interview him. And then a couple days later, he hears it and he DMs me and says, if you ever want a job down at FreightWaves, I have a spot for you. I just had that other kid, a year earlier. My wife's a triplet where all family is in New England, but judging by what we are previously been through all that stuff and where this was going in podcasting, I knew I had to plug that microphone into what FreightWaves was doing. And it was a great opportunity to go in there just as they were starting to build up TV, just as they were starting to build podcasts. And I got to be one of the original bricklayers on that. And What the Truck was a show that existed. There was a guy named Chad Prevost and John Paul Hampstead who were kind of doing a thing, but it was more informal. It was kind of just two guys talking. Maybe they'd have a guest. And I kind of brought the structure and the formula to it. And that's just like what it is now, is just something I've constantly been working on and refining just through trial and error and just doing 645 of these episodes.
You know, that's one of those things where I'm a big proponent of hillbilly engineering, and that's the scenario where Lalo and I will talk through some things, and Lalo's the mastermind behind this, and he's got a great team, and we do a lot, but we'll sit there and we literally brainstorm different things, and we'll try something. And in hillbilly engineering, you try something. If it doesn't work, you back up, try something else, and you can go on with it. You don't spend, a tremendous amount of time through committees or analyzing this or whatever. Just try it, and then, all right, if you want to make it more effective, then you start getting more experts in to say, well, how can we penetrate this market a little deeper, or how can we do this and that? So all that to say, I love what you're saying, because you're still trying it. It still evolves, doesn't it? It's constant. Where, even the market, even in the environment, things happen. I mean, who would have guessed 6 months ago there would be this war with Israel and the Gaza Strip and all that? Who would have thought that the Ukraine and Russia war would be going for, it's been going, a year now?
It was like February or March of 2022 that started. So like almost a year and a half.
And so with all of that, the amount of money and different things going on, and it's, controversial. Well, what's the impact? And that's one thing I will say, no matter what happens, what we're trying to do is look at something and break it down and say, we hear these things on the global scale. We'll hear things in the news. What's it mean to the average person like you and me? I mean, that's where we're trying to break these things down and go, I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk down to you. I'm dumb as a box of rocks. Let me talk to somebody and let's peel back the onion on this stuff and go from there. So that's the one thing that I think I like. Who is your main, I like about your show, by the way, who is your main audience, do you think, or have you done studies on all that?
Yeah, no, I have. And, I've always wanted this to sort of be a gateway drug to freight. When I worked in a 3PL, one thing I learned in having operational experience and being in companies, I think gives you a very strong competitive advantage against like producers or people who've never touched this stuff. Because I know for a fact in most companies I've been in, nobody knows what each other does. People know what their job is, but they don't know everything about the freight. And like, this applies to truck drivers. This applies to people within offices. This applies to managers. So I'm like, what the show really needs to be is it needs to cover a wide gamut. It's a podcast. It's not a webinar. I don't expect people to be taking notes during this. What it has to do is it has to do a couple of things. It has to introduce people to ideas, news, and people. And that's the most important thing. And we can introduce you to people. You can go find out more of them. You can figure out about companies. All that, because for me personally, I'm like, I need this resource because I would read about things all the time. And I'd be like, okay, but this article doesn't tell me enough about the company. How do I meet the people? How do I see the freight move? This is such a visual industry. We're talking about gigantic semi-trucks. We're talking about massive, massive steamships that are the size of multiple Empire State Buildings. These are really, really cool, giant things, operational things, warehouses, warehouse robots, so much stuff to show. And I take so much interest into it. So I've made it a big archway. And if like you look in the analytics, it splits out really, really well between CEOs and founders, truck drivers, people who work within 3PLs, students, and it's doing what I want it to do. And that's not be the show for any particular industry, but something everyone can listen to and learn more from.
Well, one of the things that is intriguing is, we started the podcast from ours and, we wanted to we'd lost touch with the pandemic with some of the people we would see in these conferences that we would go to and things on international trade and whatnot. So we just wanted it just like this, where we're just, roundtable discussion, talking about different ideas. And apparently we hit a niche with our show and go through. But the main thing is you've got your three things. We've got two primary ones. One is, what is that nugget of knowledge that somebody can take away that they become more intelligent or more proficient on the issue? And then secondly, what is or the second thing would be, what are the, 1, 2, or 3 steps of actions that somebody needs to take on a topic? So, I need to check that out. We're not going to solve world hunger. We're not trying to go through and tell you, here's, a 5-year plan for you and all this on our show. It's like, here's an issue. It's a current scenario. And you need to check this out in this particular realm, or you need to, become more proficient and up to date on this so you can be informed and or inform your superiors. So it's a very, narrow focus, which is, I think, helps in the success. That's one of the things. You're not all over the place. You're very focused on trying to get somebody and keep them informed and what's going on, right? And of course, then entertaining at the same time.
Yeah, it's sort of like organized chaos, because there are so many topics, there's so many things, but it's no different than on the mainstream side, any type of very popular sort of variety show. Even PTI, we use similar formatting, and it's like, let's talk about X topics and do it in, it depends too. It's like you guys, you have to have instincts about things. Sometimes there's stories that really take a lot of development. It's not a 10-minute interview. We need 20, maybe we need 30 minutes for this one, right? And that's because it's a huge, or maybe we even need the full hour. Maybe when the Yellow shut down, we did an hour-long special because that impacted so many people in our industry, and in so many different ways it was going to impact people, that it was necessary to do a longer, just singular topic type of show where you could bring in different voices. So it's still kind of the same idea of What the Truck, where you're talking to multiple people and they're coming in, but they're bringing their different perspectives. And I have a shot clock in my head, and I think it has to do with bad ADHD. I just have to keep things moving.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and keep going. Of most recent, talking about the industry again, is I was just talking to somebody last night. They said, "Hey, how's your podcast going?" and all that. And we talked about it. And he said, I read, now this is somebody not in the industry. Matter of fact, they're retired. But they said, I just saw where the, cardboard industry is their orders are down 25% plus. And I said, and they said, they were asking my opinion. I said, well, in current things, several months ago, I saw a report, and we talked about it on our show. U.S. orders from manufacturers are down 40%. And regardless of what you hear about, the U.S. economy is stronger and beating this than what they expected. And I'm like, well, what are you smoking? Because the things that people touch, and, the fuel prices are up, groceries are up, inflation, is hitting us, and so many things with cost, spendable income is way down. And all these things are going on. It's like, well, okay, as we go through that. And so what's the net impact? And I'm going, then we add on top of it that government shutdown we talked about a little bit. Well, all right, they avoided and did an extension or on that for 45 days. Well, we probably are, 20 days, 25 days into it. I think there's only about 20 days left, about 3 weeks worth, before that comes back up again. Well, look at what's happened. The House is in disarray, still don't have a speaker. And, they're trying to work out the budget scenarios, but that can't happen without the Speaker of the House. But the point is as we're going through, I'm like, man, I think, Lalo, you called it the perfect storm of things coming together. You've got the war going on. You got 2 wars now, major wars going on. You've got China that is flexing its muscles with the Philippines, and all that. You've got the drought down in Panama. So the Panama Canal's up a creek. You've got, all these different, you've got a government, potential government shutdown again. So what do we need to do? And I'm just saying, man, you need to be battening down the hatches, because it's going to be a bad storm when this all comes around.
We need to add the freight part. Convoy just tanked. And then Yellow, and then what is it that I was also reading the other day on our buddies over at Flexport? Also,
yeah, they've had a lot of cuts. Yeah,
had
well,
a lot.
It's funny
of
you mentioned, because there's two, freight is a big side of it, and freight demand has been killed, and the venture capital market has realized they probably didn't make the best investments too within freight. Hugely venture-backed companies, unicorn companies like Flexport, for example. They had that issue. They brought in Dave Clark. They had him there for a year. Amazon guy didn't work out. Different philosophy. Ryan admits he took his eye off the ball. The company got away from its fundamentals, was trying to sell into the markets. And like, here's the thing too. A lot of these companies, these investors got tricked because they would see during like 2020, 2021, and a little bit of 2022, that big ramp up in rates and everything. And you have these margins that never existed. It was total black swan moment. You had margins in freight. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever sold boxes before, but like a 40-foot container is like $1,200. It's not $20,000, and it's back to $1,200, but it was $20,000 for about a year there. And on the road, like trucking, like right now, spot rate's about $225, but during the pandemic, it was getting up to $4. So there was these huge sloshy margins in these investments. And a company like Convoy, they actually had their last round in spring of 2022, and it put them at a $3.8 billion valuation. Of course, right after this happens, the freight market falls off a cliff. The freight market doesn't fall off a cliff because the freight market is controlled by itself. It falls off a cliff because all that money stopped being injected into the economy. People stopped buying a bunch of stuff. All of that e-commerce through all that pandemic buying, all that revenge spending, all that stuff that was filling up churches, all that new home buying, all those house starts, all of that stuff made a huge, bountiful market. But what happened at the same time was the amount of trucking companies that entered the field to go chase that money went up 47%. The amount of brokerages shot up immeasurably. So now both the brokerage market and the trucking market are in a really bad spot right now because there's just too much capacity on both sides of the equation.
Well, and to that point is where we're at today. One of the other things that's, again, compounding this is the backup on the West Coast of all those ships in those Western ports. They have cleared all that out. Although, again, the Panama Canal, the frequency of ships moving through the Panama Canal is down and we're heading into the rainy season. So that's hopefully going to help that. But the point being is the backlog has been cleared out as far as ships, new freight coming in on. The inventory, the surplus inventory a lot of people had has been cleared out generally. So now where we're at, what that means is that it's a just-in-time inventory. So you do have this extra capacity of trucking and even rail and all those things that are out there. So that's going to drive down the rates, because it's so competitive. Yeah, you've had a few big ones come out of the market, which does help in one respect. On the other side of the coin, what I see is the independent truckers, the small trucking firms, they're really fighting it because the big trucking firms now they're playing hardball for all the, one truckload kind of thing. So unfortunately, there may be another migration there's some of these firms are going to be dropping out of the market.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a big bleed out on both the brokerage and the trucking side. And of course, we saw the massive yellow failure. And on the brokerage side, we saw one of the biggest startup collapses. And there was some news today. Convoy actually has a buyer. They haven't released the name of it. They actually have a buyer for their tech, and supposedly some of their staff is going to go with it too. So hopefully that goes through. I know the people at Convoy. I think that they're pretty good people, pretty smart people. I think they built good tech. And I think one of their, Matt Silver said this, and I agree with him. I think one of their lasting legacies, maybe their epitaph, will be that they opened freight up to a new world. They had people who would be considering Google, Uber, Amazon consider freight. And that might have been a detriment too, because, in a very small margin business like freight, if you're now a freight company with a high IT overhead and like very expensive sort of software developer salaries, that could be a big problem when all of a sudden all those margins are gone like right now. And you look at the cost of capital, and this impacts everybody. This doesn't just impact companies that are looking to fund. This impacts every trucking company that has to fund between getting paid by a shipper. Shippers trying to push terms to net 20 days, which is just insane. They have to go to factoring companies. Factoring companies finance these kind of things, but rates, just like in that market, just like you go get a house or you go get a car loan, those rates are up really high. So the cost of doing business has gotten so expensive for a lot of people. There's got to be a lot of zombies, not just in freight. I'm talking in retail. I'm talking freight. I'm talking throughout business right now. And I think everybody's just a little bit nervous because we look at you mentioned it earlier. There's black swans all over the pond right now too. And some of them have like their real impact we haven't felt yet. Like that Israel-Hamas war. We haven't really felt that yet. That happens. There's a specter of it. The market gets skittish, but we haven't really felt that yet.
Well, and that's one of the things that as we go through where it takes several months for that to show up, but where it's going to show up is going to be in certain things where, like pharmaceuticals and medical items are a big thing coming from Israel into the U.S. And believe it or not, diamonds are another thing that's a big product of Israel. Well, all of that supply chain is disrupted. Well, where does that go? Well, you got to have some of those products for, the jewelry making, for the medical and all that. Well, if they're short, where do you go? You start looking for other things, and either you're out or you find another source. The other side of this is, I will tell you, that's frustrating to me is the current administration, their lack of developing and coming to trade deals with other countries. Well, for the first time in history, I may have mentioned this on your show, for the first time in modern history, the U.S. is no longer the largest exporter of grains out there. Brazil has usurped us, and they have developed, these trade deals with different countries. That's fine. But the problem is, the difference is like, well, U.S. gets back on track with things. The problem is that you've lost a customer, and to get them back, they're like, no, I'm fine with Brazil, and taking all the grains. So you've got to work harder for that. Well, who does that affect? It affects the farmer. It affects, again, transportation and trying to get the product to market. So those are the kinds of things that when people are, I have to say it comes back around when who you vote for, what they're looking for, those kinds of things. Unfortunately, the politics in today's world, policies make a difference. And we had one of the best economies in the history of the best economy in the history of this country. And it's been destroyed in 3 years time frame, and it's still getting worse. I mean, it's just continuing on. And what gets me is the average person out there, whether you like it or not, look at the facts. The average person out there is just hurting. And that's where I think those black swans you're talking about again, just mentioned, those are the things that are going to come and bite us again with something else. About the time we think we're getting back up, bang, here it comes again.
You mentioned we can look at all these inflation reports and they can say, yeah, it's only been 3%. That none of that matters, because to me, anybody who goes into a store, I think the three categories that psychologically weigh on people more than anything when it comes to inflation is obviously groceries, because you were there at Publix. My inflation report is what that Publix receipt says. And all of a sudden, when this basket that was $50 is now $125, and you can see the Doritos, Doritos used to be $2.99. They're $6.99 now. It's ridiculous if something's not on sale or buy one, get one free. You have to be such a judicious shopper. Or you need a new car right now. Maybe your car broke down 9.5% for good credit on a loan. You got to buy a house right now. Not only are the prices way up, but that's way up too. And they go, oh, it's a cash buyer's market. Okay, well, who are those people? Maybe the Bitcoin millionaires. Most of us don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to just outlay on these houses or anything. It's the opposite. Most people have 1% or 5% to put on a house in this market. It's brutal.
Oh, and it's so frustrating. In looking at that, do you ever get any feedback on some of the things with your show when you air things that people are like, yeah, you're right on the money, or, Dooner, you're full of beans. What's going on?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting because you have the other people who agree with the data, and we use a lot of charts, and we try to back up what you're saying. And whenever I do data, it's obvious, it's based on the research that the team has done and stuff that's in our data platform. But, there's competing data sites, on LinkedIn. I don't know if you guys have trolls. Well, they have a few haters, few trolls out there. There's some that if they become an annoying reply guy, I just mute them. I don't like to. I used to get more into the trolling and the arguing, and now I'll only get engaged with someone if for a strategic reason. And I think because it'll increase something for me. I won't do it emotionally at all. It has to be incredibly manipulative and incredibly planned. Otherwise, especially on LinkedIn, it's a bad look, especially in B2B, to just be getting into fights. Grown men, what are you arguing about on here? Unless it's a good argument. But I'm talking about when stuff gets petty or stupid, or someone's just trolling you for no reason. I try to avoid that stuff and instead use that same energy and that same anger to build relationships. I'm here to build. I'm here to bring things together. And if you don't want to be a part of that's fine, because there's 10 other people that will. People spend so much time getting hung up on one problem or one idiot or what. They're not even in your way. Just look a little bit this way instead.
Well, with all that to say, the one thing I guess with our challenge is we're constantly looking at it I wish we had an easier way. That's one thing about podcasts. There's not an easy way to have an active interaction with your listeners. It's going to be delayed, or you record a show and then you publish it so much later and then trying to get the feedback. So that's been a challenge for us. Whereas like your show where you're doing it live and then you have, of course, then it's recorded and people can pick it up later as well. So it's, when you're doing it live, I guess the other side of that is, have you ever had any situations where, I'm sure you have, where you go like, it's live, oops, something went wrong, or you've had to recover?
I think every episode, something goes wrong. Something doesn't go off on the right time, but we've had the hardest is when a guest doesn't show up in the open and you're kind of like, okay, I have my 5-minute open planned. And then, I have like 20 minutes for this next person and they don't show up. And then the next guest isn't scheduled to come in for like 10, 15 minutes. And you just kind of, because I host solo, so you got to kind of riff and figure out what to do in those situations. But at the same time, I think the nice thing about podcasts versus like a real network TV show is we're expected to break the fourth wall. We're expected to talk to the audience. If something goes wrong, it's part of the show. Okay, we're just going to run with it and we'll go what's next. And if worse comes to worse, what's going to happen? I can talk about anything. If I had nothing prepared, I can go to freightways.com and grab a headline and we can talk about it. I mean, you have to make it work. It's not ideal, but when those situations happen, the hard stuff is you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So sometimes if your dumb mouth says something, you can't really control that. Fortunately, for 600 or so episodes, a lot of hours, I've had a live mic in front of me and I understand what happens when you light the wick, and you got to be careful and you got to understand what you're saying. And, they trust me and I try not to break that trust. And I also I do some shows, they try to be edgy and swear or be really off color. I make sure the swears are, I want you to be able to put this on in your office or to put it on with your kids. It's still adult conversation. My kids listen to my show. I want them to be able to. So if there's swears, they're getting beeped out. They one might slip through here and there. Sometimes you got the Chicago guys, they come on, with their filthy mouths. I love you guys in Chicago. But sometimes they got a mouth on them, some of them street cats. But other than that, it works out fine. And what it actually has done and what I love about live is I used to spend so much time obsessing about editing. And I would do one show a week and then I would edit it and I'd put it out the next day and I'd spend 6 hours editing and taking out every little small imperfection and nuance. And I'd just craft it and I'd sit there and I'd just whittle it away. So many hours. Now I go live. Now all my focus instead, all that time is on clipping the show, marketing the show, connecting with the guests, giving the show back to them, connecting with the audience, and just making sure that the formula that we have for the promotional formula is followed afterwards. Because I think the mistake some people make is they think the podcast is the work. This part's the record part. This is the easiest part that you'll ever do. The easiest part is just talking to some people. The hard part is getting people to listen to you, let you know you exist. And importantly, if you want to be professional, if you're a professional, you live off of it, to also be a place that they feel comfortable sponsoring.
That's the one thing is people are all the time saying, I was thinking about doing a podcast or whatever. And we've had people approach us and what do you think or whatever? And I'm like, the big thing about a podcast, the recording of the show, you hit it. That's the easy part, man. When we're doing it, it's what are you going to talk about? And are you disciplined to keep it short? And, do you have something to say that people are going to be interested in? But then you're lining up your guest and then you're trying to do the publishing and you're trying to promote the thing and all those kinds of things. There is a tremendous amount of time, spent. And that's where a lot of people will launch it. And then, it doesn't even make it a year or something like that. So, I mean, I got to give credit in this. And you mentioned your staff, Lalo and his team are phenomenal. We've got some great editors. We've got some good promoters. We got all that kind of stuff in behind it. So what about you? You've got, a couple of different, editors or producers or whatever. What about your show? What do you got to support you?
So I'm the main producer, and I like it that way. I want to control what content is on there. I want to control the relationship between guests. As you guys know, I reach out to you directly. I don't want someone else doing that for me, because the whole reason I started podcasts to begin with was a Trojan horse to meet people. As a networking accelerator, so I can meet people. I will never give that away. I will never give the guest booking away, because I want that, and it's worked. One of the biggest accelerators I had is I brought on this guy, Justin Martin, former truck driver, which is super helpful in my space, because you can bring in, I've worked with other editors, but they don't know the material. So they hear stuff and they go, well, I guess that sounds exciting, but they don't know, like, oh, this is a crucial issue that impacts X here. And Justin has that background. So I can be like, I don't even have to be like, go to like 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I can be like, grab the section where we talked about X with X. And he knows immediately what the meat of that will be. And then me, I don't have to sit there on the couch or on the computer, like just cutting, editing videos. And because that grinds you down, because then you got to go to TikTok, and then you got to go to Twitter, and then you got to go to Facebook, and then you got to go to LinkedIn, and then you got to go to YouTube, then you got to make YouTube shorts. And like you guys mentioned it, yeah, What the Truck, it starts as a live stream, and like that gets promoted, but the real product is like the on-demand video and the on-demand audio and video podcast. And also the other product is the social clips, because these days social clips, with the way analytics work, especially sites like TikTok, now an episode might, like a full episode, it might get 12,000 audio downloads, and it might get 30,000 like video views, but then the clips on TikTok can get millions.
That's the thing that's so phenomenal. I am blown away with the way social media is, expanded. The only other unfortunate about that is there are now 2 generations that are down to sound bites. They live their lives and they'll get information off a sound bite, and it's like, man, there's a lot to this topic, and you're only looking at maybe a headline or a sound bite or something, and you're making your assumptions or taking action based on a sound bite. Check your article out and listen to it, or get into the details. So
we had a great team too. So we built a studio twice. The first time we built a studio at Freightways, we had this like Epcot Imagineer. I don't know who hired him. For some reason, this Epcot Imagineer came in and he painted it like all blue with these fake bricks, and it looked terrible. So we had to like tear the whole studio down and rebuild the whole thing. And now it's really nice. And we have like 5 or 6 guys in there who run everything, and they do all the guest chat. They'll do all the stuff that like it would be impossible to do What the Truck with one person. So it's very, very valuable to have that team behind you. And people always go like, well, why don't you go and like, people know Dooner brand. Like, why don't you just go do it on your own? And I'm like, you don't get it. You don't get it. Like, A, I like Freightways. B, I have stock in the company. I'm part owner. C, they allow me to scale faster than my competition does. There's other shows that come out all the time that want to grow and get big, and they do a great job. But I have a machine behind me, and I use that machine.
And you originally started like in a little like sound booth, didn't you? Weren't you all like, yeah, you were in a sound booth, and then didn't you all also have a
pandemic got rid of that? I hated that thing. It was so hot in there. We used to call it the hot yoga studio, and I hated the sound because it was nice to get other sound out, but it was so dead. It was like the deadest room I've ever been in my life. It gave no reverb, no vibrato to your voice, and I'm like, well, that kind of sounds like really, really AM.
And then, but y'all were on Sirius for a little bit, weren't you?
I used to host Sirius for a while. That was just a different show I did. I did our Saturday show on Sirius, which I really enjoyed. The one thing I do miss in podcasts and I loved on radio is, and you mentioned that earlier, is like that instant feedback. People could call in and you could have like some truck driver like driving down the road, like yell at you and tell you you're an idiot or tell you some crazy story. And that was always great too, especially the days where you're bored of the news. Like there are times when like nothing's really happened, like everything sucks, the market, but nothing's happened yet. And it's like, how many days in a row can I go on here and depress everybody with like how bad the freight market is? So like you love when like anything but freight at the moment, call in and like tell me your crazy like truck stop story.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. I will say, when we go out to conferences, we have in this international compliance and transportation and all that, we have a lot of different trade associations that want us to come to their show or to their conference. And we will interview some folks and whatnot. And we're working on a scenario where we'll do some live broadcasting from there or do a show from there. But it is so much fun as we're doing it, and you have that instant things going on. But the thing that's so amazing in our situation is that people are like, we had one person that said, they are in charge of their compliance, and they make their staff listen to our show. It's a requirement every week. And I'm like, you're kidding me. And we've had rookies, we've had senior people that have come up and said, man, I've learned so much, or you stimulated. It's good to go review the basics on something, or, we got into some really advanced topics and all that. Do you ever get a scenario where you're able to, let's say, get out with the public and have some of that interaction and like at a conference of some kind or anything like that?
Oh, of course. I do What the Truck from all of our FreightWaves conferences. We used to, right before the pandemic, we actually did we went to 8 different shows. We would with our sonar team in the What the Truck booth, we would pair both in packages. So I would get to broadcast when our sonar team would get to pitch sonar. We could create some synergy between the two. Maybe they're like, hey, hey, come on, let's find out about your company. Come on, What the Truck, then go talk over the booth. So that was pretty fun. I like those conferences when I get paid. I don't really like doing them anymore when I don't, because I don't know. I'm a weirdo. Okay. I'll tell you guys first, as someone who has a podcast and has to be really social, I'm really not that. So in person I am, but in doses. And I find conferences really, really overwhelming after a while. But I like our FreightWaves ones because, I know how to get backstage. And I can hide, and there's a little bit of control effect. No, and I can come out, but it's easier to get a little separation. But we do multiple What the Trucks from there. We do some stage work from there, and it's great. You get to see the audience. You can throw hats at them. You can bring them up and ring the cowbell. Steam Logistics is bringing their gong on set at F3 in November, and right here in Chattanooga at our conference, so everyone can ring the gong. And in person, it's just you got to elevate it though. Because I'm people see this online thing, and I realize that a lot of them are people who have heard it and hear, and you guys probably know this too. You're running someone at conferences, and they know you a lot more well than you know them, obviously, because they're I listen to the show and they know this, and you're it gives me anxiety sometimes though, because I'm damn, I don't usually before guests, I'd have time to research you a little bit, and I'd know a little bit about what you're about. And now I feel I don't know anything, and all this stuff. And I feel it's very asymmetrical.
It's you've opened up the kimono on the show, and they you're yeah, I remember, don't you? I'm oh man, they got a good memory. Oh. But I got to say, it was really surreal. Our first conference that we happened to go to was in Dallas. And in Grapevine, actually. And Lalo had put together, and our backdrop, you probably remember seeing it. It's the yellow with the 2 cartoon characters on there and whatnot. And so we had this, that as a backdrop. And I happened to walk up behind some people that were standing there, and one girl was turning to the other one and saying, oh, hey, I listened to these guys and all that. Well, I was just sitting there listening, not thinking, even I said, well, what do you think of the show? Is there anything we can do to improve it? And, literally trying to, spark the thing. What can we do to make it, more entertaining and all that? And it really kind of surprised me, because she says, it's you, it's the voice, it's what. I'm oh, wow. It got really, they wanted selfies and all that. And I'm okay, this is surreal. I was this is a little different. And, anyway, we got around, and you just kind of go with the flow, but it was great. These people, I love talking with the audience, and especially if they remember some of it is a little wild, because they've listened to so much, and you go one show after another, and a lot of times I forget this stuff. It's what we talk about? Oh yeah, I remember that now.
Yeah, I used to be so self-conscious about that at first. The first, you'd go and people would be oh, I want to take a picture with you, and then oh, you do? Okay. I mean, it's just a stupid podcast kind of thing, but now I get it. I embrace it. And people like it. They're oh, I was out at this thing and I saw this person that you all know. So it's cool for that. And you get it, but it's a lot of stuff gets in your own head. You have to get over when you're very visible.
I was just, when you look like me, the south end of a northbound mule, I mean, I'm you want to take a picture with me? Really? Okay. All right. So, but you know what? It is so cool, and people get so excited with it. And it's just it's so humbling, because it's on another scenario. It reaffirms that the things that you're doing with, with your show and all that, wow, people are literally listening and they're picking up on this stuff. So you want that to, hey, I take that as a serious aspect. And Lalo and I, man, tag team on this all the time. So.
Well, I love what you guys do. I'm a big fan of your show. We've almost gone an hour. I have another call I have to take at 3. And it's like, I feel like we've been talking for like 15 minutes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's what I was going to say. I know you probably have a hard stop. So anything you want to wrap up with, or like I know Craig is very vocal about like, we said this, and you got to listen to us. I mean, I don't know if you are also on that bandwagon or how you want to wrap up how the freight market, is going, anything really. I mean, just because I know we're coming up on that hard stop.
Well, hey, the freight market is, all markets are in a lot of trouble. You guys know that. I'm not telling you anything new. What I can do and why you might want to listen to What the Truck is I can keep you abreast of the top news that's happening in our industry. I can guarantee you that freight is the lifeblood of the economy, and what happens here will impact what you do. And if you want to learn more about freight, maybe be entertained and have it at a level that I think, and I don't dumb it down, but it's at a level that I think all people can understand. And one reason I don't say dumbing it down is because we're in an industry where compliance people, the word tariff means an HTS code. And to trucking people, the word tariff means the price that you're paying, the rate you're paying on trucking. And when you put two of those people in the room, it's really confusing because I was one of those compliance people that I went over to the trucking side and someone's talking about tariffs. And I'm like, okay, what's the HTS code? I gotta, what's the tariff? And they're like, what are you talking about? We're talking about rate, like the trucking rate. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's something I realized. And What the Truck, if you like it, it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can listen on Spotify, we got video now. Megaphone lets you upload video. So you can do audio or video on there. FreightWaves YouTube channel, all episodes are on there. You can watch them in YouTube, his entire playlist. And we go live on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, noon Eastern time on FreightWaves Twitter, FreightWaves or X. I don't think I'll ever be able to call it X. FreightWaves Twitter, FreightWaves LinkedIn, FreightWaves Facebook, FreightWaves YouTube. So there's so many different avenues that you can watch and enjoy. But if you're like me, I usually don't catch things live. I like on demand. I like things at my own leisure, usually when I'm walking the dog. So,
man, I'll tell you what,
I make it easy for you.
This is fantastic. It's a great show, folks. Our listeners, I'm telling you, this is one that you need to take a look at. It's FreightWaves out there. What the Truck? It is fantastic. And man, I tell you what, Tim, we really appreciate you coming on our show, and thank you for having us on yours as well. Hopefully it'll be maybe another scenario. So it'll be some other things that are coming up. So.
Yeah, I got to bring you guys back soon, especially that government shuts down. In the meantime, too, you want to follow me. I'm usually most active on LinkedIn or X, at Timothy Dooner, DOONER on X, or just look up Timothy Dooner on LinkedIn. I connect with anybody. Unless you're a podcast promoter from like Singapore. I get way too many of those. Those are the only ones I do.
They do come out of the woodwork, don't they?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for joining us. SimplyTrade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor SimplyTrade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at SimplyTradePod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. SimplyTrade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by SimplyTrade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situation. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.